Barrel this week, we're talking about RPGs. What are they? What do you need? And what system is right for you on this episode of Fandom Roulette. Alright, welcome to the podcast, everyone. My name is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And welcome back to Fandom Roulette. So, Cody, just a quick question for you. One that I'm hoping we're going to start lots of episodes with. What nerdy things have you been getting up to this week?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I just finished The Defenders, which I'm sure we'll talk about in our grab bag episode.
Nice. I actually also just finished The Defenders.
Nice.
I quite enjoyed it. One teensy observation. I just love how much they love destroying doors. That was very fun to me. It was really nice watching, just like, if they found a door, they would just knock that bastard off its hinges right away. That was very fun for me.
Super power play.
Yeah, it was pretty great. Very nice. That was a good show. And for me personally, I watched a bunch of movies, and the one I'm going to talk briefly about right now is Ex Machina, because that's a movie that's been sticking with me, and it's not necessarily the most action-packed nerd fare I've ever seen in my entire life. It was kind of a three-hander, if you will forgive the jargon term. There's basically three actors in it. There's a fourth actor, but she doesn't have any lines in it. And it was a very good movie. Very interesting about robots and things like that. So that's what I've been up to this week. But yeah, so we're here this week to kind of talk to you guys about role-playing games. It's the one thing that Cody and I have a lot of experience with. This was the thing that we had the shared experience with. So we're kind of coming at this from different angles of things, but on areas where we're both kind of experts. So take it away, Cody.
Yeah, so for a lot of people, I imagine, we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff in this particular part of the podcast that you have no experience with. You've probably heard of Dungeons and Dragons and kind of the demonic scare that brought about a little while back.
Nerd shit.
But I wanted to do a kind of an inaugural first person's RPG episode talking about RPGs in general.
It's kind of gained some popularity, but for a lot of people I know it's kind of that sort of last nerdy taboo in a way. So
right, the last step into nerdom.
Yes, it's point of no return at that point, so
yeah, so RPG is short for role-playing game, and I'm sure if you watched the first episode, we kind of interchangeably said RPG or role-playing game.
Yeah. But
to give it a definition, if you will, it's a game in which players take on the roles of imaginary characters who engage in a setting overseen by a referee. That's kind of the shorthand, and I was a little reluctant to find a definition online and kind of spout it out, because I feel like it's a lot more than that. Like, it's a pretty general...
I would agree, although I think one of the interesting things about that definition is it kind of shows just the variety and scope of RPGs. So
right.
Which is something we'll be talking about a little bit later, I'm sure. But go on, what was your major qualm with it?
I feel like defining something so... in a short sentence, kind of doesn't give it the justice that it deserves, in my personal opinion.
Well, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about it, now that I'm thinking about it, I do actually have kind of an issue with it, which is something we might be getting into a little bit later, but it's the definition of referee.
Yeah.
Because there's something about that I think kind of does a disservice to one very large component of a role-playing game group or system or family, I suppose, which is something we'll be getting into a little bit later. I think thinking of a GM as a referee is not necessarily very useful, actually.
It depends. So my personal, if I had to not take this from the internet and, compile it into something readable and easy to understand, I would define a role-playing game as when you were a kid and you were playing imaginary games with your buddies, whether it was, Cowboys and Indians, like when I was young, to pretending to be like the hot show that was coming on. So like for us, or for my group of friends, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is something that pops up. We'd all pretend to be the different turtles. It's like that, but there are a lot of rules, or typically. And there's usually one person who is the almost kind of like the script writer.
Yeah.
But the script writer who's got the other characters in his script book writing on it as well.
Yeah, and so I think that's why it's not necessarily right to say referee, because if you're, watching a sporting match, the referee is kind of a passive person observing, and then will just yell when something doesn't go the way that the rules dictate they should go. But I don't think that's what that overseer does, or that scriptwriter does, because that person is kind of constantly adapting and rolling with the punches, whereas in a referee sense, it's just kind of a person observing the events of the things that's going on. So that's kind of where my qualm with thinking of them as a referee comes from personally.
Yeah, and I can see that. I mean, granted, when we play role-playing games,
yes,
we dive deep into the first two letters, which is role-playing.
Yeah.
And the game kind of becomes secondary.
We roll all the dice we're supposed to roll, Cody.
That's fair, but we do take our role-playing a little more seriously than other groups. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another fair point, is that and that's why I really like role-playing games, is you can kind of go bananas with it. If you want it to be this Tolkien Lord of the Rings style adventure, mm-hmm. where everyone's in character and everyone's having a good time trying to get that golden knot ring to the knot mountain of doom,
yeah,
then you can. Or you can also just have a very fun romp where you make silly characters and then just go and have a blast, and not worry about the story per se, but just have fun with the game mechanics.
Sure, yeah. And so here's the thing too, is I think one of the things that has prevented people from really engaging with RPGs is something actually from my own personal experience before I started really playing them, which is, are you familiar with the comic strip Foxtrot?
Yes.
So there was an amazing little mini arc of Foxtrot where the nerdy younger brother is trying to convince his sister to play Dungeons and Dragons. And
I think I know what you're talking about.
And the one that sticks out more than anything else is she comes back with this gigantic book and she goes, "Okay, Jason, I read this book. Can we begin now?" And he goes, "Oh, no, Paige. You still have to read all of these." And it's like 3 shelves just littered with books, and it just says D&D Volume 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I think a lot of people think of RPGs as what we just kind of described as kind of like rule monkey shenanigans of, well, you rolled your dice, but on a Tuesday that would have been successful, but it's actually a Thursday afternoon, and so you needed a 16 instead of a 13. And it's like very pedantic, lots of tomes that prevent you, just a common person, from kind of engaging with it, because if you haven't read the literal tomes of information, you can't engage with it. But that's very much not the case, because there are people out there who don't necessarily play fast and loose with the rules, but who, don't necessarily take it incredibly seriously either. Find a nice happy medium. And, as we're going to talk about a little bit later in the game, there's actually basically a role-playing system for anyone, I would argue.
Yeah, that is definitely something that has changed over the many years of kind of Dungeons and Dragons being like the cream of the crop, so to speak, when it came to role-playing games. There is if you're looking for a certain kind of experience where you want to role-play something very particular, there is a game out there for you. And if there isn't necessarily in there, there are ways to tweak and modify games to get what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I think the Foxtrot comic where you have to read 5 different books is total BS. Mm-hmm. And it kind of always has been. That's just kind of the joke that earlier editions had, where if you wanted to be really good, you had to read all these books and you had to do all this nonsense. But when I started playing 5th edition, I literally picked up a $25 box that had the starter kit, which had an adventure in it, had all the rules that I needed and ways to tweak them. And before I even bought my first book, granted they were all, on sale on Amazon for some cheap price, we got easily a month's worth of gaming out of, of regular playing out of that little box. And we never needed more rules. But
for sure,
after about a month, I got tired of the story, or at least for me, the story that was being told, and I wanted to tell my own story.
Yeah, and I think that's the case for a lot of people too, right? It's always good to have sort of that foundation, especially if it's your first time playing, just to sort of give you an idea of this is what a world might look like. It might have these aspects to it, but you can very easily chop and screw it to be your own thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so to drop another podcast, sort of the inspiration for this podcast, The Adventure Zone, you can definitely tell that Griffin had an idea and then just started kind of making it his own basically immediately. He throws out enemies that I'm sure you can't necessarily find in a lot of players' handbooks.
No, probably not.
Adapted, and he took what was sort of a core idea and just kind of rolled from that. And so I think that really shows the potential of our role-playing games. As you were saying, I know they started off with basically a starter's kit and kind of went from there as well. So
yeah, so shutting the book on the whole, you need to read 4 books. It's nonsense. A good / nice DM will kind of bring you in slowly and not like dip you in a vault filled with books and force you to read all of them before you can even start playing.
Exactly.
Because that would just be... I wouldn't have anyone to play with if that was the case.
Yep. I mean, ideally, if with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, all you really have to read is your race and your class.
Pretty much.
Basically,
I mean, there's some other rules in there.
Yeah,
but
sure.
At least when I'm playing, I go over those slowly and surely, not just bum rush you with all these rules and things for playing.
Exactly.
But I figure let's get into the kind of the meat of it.
Sure.
So in the description I gave, it's a group of players and then your so-called quote-unquote referee. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk to us about being the player, being part of the role-playing game experience? Sure,
okay. So, like we were saying, there's all kinds of different systems out there for any kind of style of play, which range from as simple as having a note card with ideas that you can find in a book to as complex as a multiple page character sheet that has spaces for rolling dice and things like that. I've played games that are as complex as having 6 or 7 different stats and things like that. But at its core, you basically just have to be a person who is a willing participant in having an adventure with a group of other people. It's collaborative storytelling, which I know sounds very weird, but it's worth it, trust me. So basically when I come to the table with 2 things, which is sort of a baseline character idea, which almost never ends up being what I thought or expected it to be, which I think is just sort of like, that could just be a definition of role-playing games, a collaborative storytelling mechanic that turns into something you never anticipated it being. So you need that, and then you just kind of need to have someone who understands it enough to help you, kind of guide you along the way. So I think I've kind of reached the point where, at least with Dungeons & Dragons, I've become one of those people in helping others with the setup. But you have to basically be a willing participant in letting the story go where it needs to go. So, let's see, breakdowns of...
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's stay on the player topic for
100%.
What is your favorite character that you've made in your time playing role-playing games?
Ever?
I mean, give me a close to number 1. If you can't pick a number 1, just one that sticks out in your mind.
I think it's tied for first place.
Oh, snap.
So, my number 1, I think, is a character named Guy de Nord, who was in Gurps. It was called Banestorm, which I won't
dope.
I won't get into like the details of it, but basically Guy de Nord came from a fantasy like France. Think like Alexander Dumas, like Count of Monte Cristo, swashbuckling, like probably would have been played by Errol Flynn if it was a real book type character. So he had a rapier and he was secretly a pirate. So basically all he did was put on a domino mask and no one recognized him anymore. And he was very charismatic. And one of the things about GURPS is you have to choose like advantages and disadvantages. And so one of his disadvantages was anytime he was fighting with someone in single combat and they were wearing a hat, he had to knock the hat off. And so it's things like that that made him really fun to play. It was also kind of the first time that I had ever actively, openly acted as charismatic as I've kind of become over time, which I had the person who was the game master for that, and my friend Jake, who I'll probably be talking about a lot, and hopefully might come on one day, who even knows, said that if I was ever feeling self-doubt or anything like that, and anything like that, just kind of channel my inner Guy, because he saw me doing things as Guy that I would never do as Joe, and he was like, you clearly have it in you somewhere, why don't you just embrace that? And so I think that's kind of why that character sticks out. And I think my other favorite character at this point would probably be Umgram, who is the character we're playing right now in our game, who's your pretty standard dwarf cleric, and he was an idea that I had that kind of steamrolled into something I never anticipated it being, but it's a lot of fun to watch him grow and mature, and I've done things with Umgram that I would never have done the first couple of times I've been playing, because I've become a little bit more confident and mature as a player to do things that might not necessarily be the most beneficial to the group as a whole. Yeah, and I think just Umgram comes with maturity and just kind of playing through and not being afraid. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I enjoy Umgram being the dungeon master of that game. I never know what to expect when Umgram and Finn are part of the party.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too, right? Is I think people have an idea of what a cleric is, and I think a lot of people think of clerics as kind of the people who want to be like the stoic man who does all of his various godly things, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just wanted to try out a spellcaster. I'd never done spellcasting before, so that was my big thing. Do you have any other questions about, being a player or anything like that? Keep them coming. I love answering questions, so.
Goodness,
Because I have some questions for you on the Game Master side of things.
Oh, shit.
So.
As a player,
yeah,
what do you find most frustrating about whether it's other players or maybe it's even me? Maybe it's the Dungeon Master. Are we going to get deep here and talk about frustration?
We're going to pull back this curtain.
I mean, a little bit.
I guess frustration things would have to be... It's all temporal based, I'm not going to lie, which is basically the later in the evening it gets, the higher my frustration level rises. And so it's something that I'm personally 100% guilty of, but sometimes there will be scenes that feel like they've reached a natural conclusion, and then someone else will be like, but I want to do X. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, it's 1 a.m. I have to be up for work in the morning. It's a special event weekend, which means I have to be there at 9 o'clock, which means I have to be out the door at 8 o'clock, which means I have to be up in, a couple of hours so I can be ready to eat breakfast. I think I'm going to die. Anytime, there's every now and then it seems like things will kind of reach a natural conclusion, and then we'll just kind of keep going. And then I guess another kind of frustration point is sometimes it feels like things are dragging, and I understand that when it comes to leveling up and things like that, sometimes it takes a very long time once you reach level 5 to reach that next plateau. But there was always this kind of secret understanding that if we reached level 6, we were going to be safe. If we died, we didn't have to go back to level 3. And so I'm sitting there just every encounter just desperate for more points, and then we would hear the total and I'd be like, oh no, oh dang, that's not that many points. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have a lot of frustrations outside of, every session is different, so
that's true.
Sometimes we'll have sessions where everything's moving super smooth and lots of fun, fast and loose, and then there's other times where things might drag a little bit, and we might, find ourselves in what should be a simple thing that's just kind of taking forever. And that's been true with any group I've ever played with. This is not one group in particular. I think, every group has its own dynamics. It's kind of what it is. I think I've always had the benefit of playing with a group of people who are all friends in real life, which I think helps make things move a lot smoother.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could ever imagine myself kind of just rolling up to a game store where they were playing Dungeons and Dragons on a random Wednesday night and just kind of plot myself down, because would be, I'd be terrified because I bring a certain level of myself to it, which is, I enjoy my high adventure, but I'm also kind of just like a goofster who enjoys riffing on things and, being kind of like irreverent at every turn. So I might run across people who don't play like that. They play serious, and that would be weird for me. And then the other thing is, it just kind of, I think it would be kind of weird to just kind of throw myself into a group of people who I've never met before. I don't really have any outside experience with, just because it's kind of a scary thing, because you're kind of putting on a weird persona that you're not used to. And so if you know people around the table or through the internet, that's another thing we can talk about. If you know these people, then you feel a little more confident in acting as your strange self because they know you. So I don't know.
It's kind of funny that you say you're terrified of playing Dungeons and Dragons with people, but you're willing to broadcast yourself to the world about said Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference, which is they can't actually see me. So
Yet.
That's fair. Okay, well,
we'll cross that bridge when it comes.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. Any other questions? Keep them coming.
That's
I love answering them. I love talking about this stuff. So
for right now, that's kind of all I got.
Sure.
I mean, I don't want to ask too many questions that are so specific.
Yeah,
especially because a lot of people aren't going to have the backstory to answer these questions.
100%. So. Well, can I talk about one last thing that I've noticed? I've kind of seen as I matured as a player.
Hell yeah.
Which is how writing character backstories.
Yeah.
Which I was always that kid growing up. When I say kid, I started playing in high school, but I was kind of a kid, I guess. I would write, 10-page backstory of all of this various, hack and slash and the best this and the most competent at this, and I was the world's greatest fighter, and I was a gladiator who killed all the things that ever came through, and then you're a level 1 character, and so it's you could do 10 damage, but weren't you a year ago the best fighter to ever fight? It's shh. And so kind of how it's changed is I kind of just come up with loose frameworks for characters and kind of see how the pieces fill in. So, me personally, I will sort of do 3 things, which is character motivation, and that can change over time too, obviously, but just kind of a baseline character motivation. So, with my one character, it's just to be remembered. He's a bard who wants to tell stories so he can be remembered. This isn't another game I'm playing. Kind of one fear that the character has, and one thing that the character is good at, and I just kind of go from there, and I just kind of watch the character evolve naturally, as opposed to coming in with this big stack tome-like thing that I've written about all my characters' quirks and advantages and disadvantages. I kind of watch them grow organically, because that's just kind of how humans work too. I'm not the same person I was at 15, because I've grown and matured and I've learned things, and so it's kind of cool to just sort of take a more passive role in backstory creation and kind of letting the pieces fall in as, the game master gives me little nuggets of information about, your character's like this. So one tiny quick example, in the game where I'm a bard, I ran across a halfling village. And so the character asked me, she hears my last name, she asks me, are you a member of the, banker Weatherbees? And I go, oh no, I'm actually from the apiary Weatherbees. And so, right there, now we're establishing that I have, a branching family tree. That's not something I ever anticipated. So, yeah, I think being a little more vague with your character's backstory, having an idea of what they're like, personality-wise, but not necessarily anything too incredibly deep or specific. So, at most a paragraph. Tends to be what I write anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least the games we play. Now, this might not always be the case. You might run a game where you're already playing as, heroes that have done incredible things.
Yeah.
So maybe the 10-page backstory works somewhere.
Sure.
But if you're going to just start your very first game, I wouldn't be the best. Do the 0 to hero story.
Yeah.
Very brief. Maybe there's some tragic thing that happened that got you got you to where you are now. I think having less is more in this case.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the system you're running as well. That's fair.
Yeah, you have to be careful, and usually, at least coming from a GM perspective, you're gonna know where this adventure is going, what the game master might need from you, and well, hopefully, you'd hope that communication would be a part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that's a better way to go, not writing a 10-page story. Because when you're level 1, you're not going to do those incredible things that you told about in your backstory. So how are you gonna weave that in? Like, oh, I miss everything that I hit because I'm still a level 1 little farmer boy.
I think one of the things that with the one character, like his background was a gladiator and he was like the best gladiator. And I think a little bone that my DM threw me was, oh, well, being a gladiator and being out in the real world are like very different concepts of fighting, because in a lot of cases when you were a gladiator you were fighting people who weren't actively fighting back, or you weren't fighting people that had any level of skill in
fighting. It was like for show.
Yeah, and so that was sort of the bone they threw me, where it's like I was a really good gladiator, but being a really good gladiator doesn't necessarily translate to being a really good out in the world fighter yet.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then I think one other thing too is a lot of people sort of discount non-combat things. But I think it's very fun to have a character who's like good at a weird myriad of different things. I wish we used persuasion and deception a little more in our current game, but yeah, those are always fun to kind of play around with. Right?
I agree.
So shall we transition into the other side of the screen, if you will?
Yes. Don't look.
Oh gosh, you have all the things back there, like how hard it is to knock over a brick wall. Or how far a barrel can roll, right? That's what's on the DM screen, right?
No.
Sure.
My current DM screen, which is
your laptop?
Well, it's my laptop. It's the actual screen to hide little notes, little Post-it notes I put down.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And my, dice, so that I can hide my rolls.
Cool.
But no, a lot of what's behind the screen is just me keeping notes. It's me listening to you guys when you do stuff, because that's what's going to be important later.
Yeah.
When you guys make choices, because I'm a big choices guy. I loved to go back to other like video games. Like I loved Mass Effect 2, where choices determine the outcome of the game. Mm-hmm. So I'm always writing down little nuggets here and there of what you guys are doing. Like if you pillage a town and someone manages to get out of the town and go and tell other people, like, how's that going to affect you later?
Okay.
So mostly notes, and then there's, like, some little DM helpful tips, like how long can a group travel for, like mechanical stuff that we don't need to necessarily get into a whole lot.
Sure.
Stuff
that can come down the road.
Yeah, because at least when we're playing in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, while it is the lightest rule set, I think, in my personal opinion, of Dungeons and Dragons, there's still a lot of rules to kind of keep in mind. So there's a lot of that stuff.
Okay, fair enough.
What else you got for me?
So, I guess one thing that has always kind of scared me about DMing, and I'm sure it scared a lot of people as well, is I feel like I'd be like one of those people who I'd have all my little eggs lined up all in a row, and then someone would come in and just kick the eggs in like a way that I'm like, oh, I did not anticipate that happening. So like, let's say you go into a town and important plot-driven NPC character is standing there saying like, well, hello, travelers, welcome to, and then like the rogue just stabs him and they keep walking, and I'm like, oh, that was the whole quest. How does a dungeon master kind of deal with those kinds of shenanigans?
There's multiple schools of thought. Some people like to railroad you. They'll tell you that the rogue can't go and stab that NPC in the back because he's too strong, or give you some kind of reason within the game to be like, maybe he equipped him with plate mail, and all of a sudden your rogue sneaking up behind him, now he's got to make a tougher roll, and he'll never hit that at level 1.
Yeah.
There's that school of thought. My school of thought is just let you guys go bananas. If you wanna stab that guy in the back, I will find another NPC who I can just come up with on the fly to give you that information. Maybe it's not, and this has happened a couple of times where you guys have initially passed up what I wanted you to do something else, and then I just make whatever you're interested in, that's going to move the story forward.
Okay.
So whether it's, the old lady that's cackling off in the distance and you're like, that lady's crazy, let's go see her, versus the knight in shining armor who's helping a poor sick boy off on the side of the road because he got trampled on, or
that sounds
whatever.
Boring.
Right.
Knight in shining armor.
Right.
Not my dark twisted fantasy.
But it'll end up being that both the paladin who is helping the sick boy and the witch kind of have similar things to say.
Okay.
A lot of...
Interesting.
And I think I know that sounds like it's railroady in a certain sense, but I always let you guys kind of go bananas wherever you go. Like, if you want to go and explore the weird thing that I described to you, go ahead.
Sure.
It's fine. I usually keep my stuff pretty loose. Unless there's a dungeon coming up, which I always love a good dungeon crawl.
Yeah. It's fun to have a good dungeon crawl every now and then.
Yeah, so, those all have pretty meticulously planned out, and there's not a whole lot of, weird stuff that can happen in a dungeon unless you incorporate, characters that can actually talk with the party and things like that. It's not just filled with bears or, wolves and stuff like that. Maybe they're filled with characters. That might be a little weird, but sure. I think... Yeah, I just leave the rest of it. When you're out exploring the world or you're exploring a town, I leave that up in the wind. My goal is to create characters that hopefully you'll like and come back to, or maybe not necessarily like, but maybe you hate them. Maybe they're just I hate that guy. I hate that Bob Barker.
That old man in the mirror.
Oh yeah, I made
old man.
I had a character who was a puzzle in a dungeon where he was only in the mirror of a room, and he was pilfering the treasure that was in the middle of the room on their side, and the solution was supposed to be to dip the mirror on its side and shake him out of the mirror. But I don't think you guys ever did that.
Whatever.
But you guys hated that guy, and it's just because I made him that way. I made him so that you're I want to figure out this puzzle, and then you never, and then you didn't.
Figuring out. Nope.
Hey guys, this is Cody, your resident nerd at Fandom Roulette Podcast. Thank you so much for getting to this point. We really appreciate it. If you want to get in on the conversation, you want to talk about RPGs, maybe you want to talk about video games, history, whatever you want us to talk about the grab bag, feel free to tweet us at fandomr_podcast. That will be our Twitter handle. If you want to get in a little more personal, a little more private, if you will, feel free to email us at fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com. If you want updates on things such as when our YouTube is going to go up and when we're going to get on iTunes so that it's easier to get a hold of us, follow us on our website. It's fandomroulette.com. That's where we'll be. As always, guys, stay nerdy.
So, not to necessarily put you on the spot.
Sure.
But you have some experience as a game master, a lore creator. Yeah. Of the groups you've played, who do you have the most fun playing with?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Actually,
rather,
I pulled back that question of the different styles of games you've played. I guess what's your most favorite kind of adventure to tell? Are you a fan of the Tolkien style Grand Quest? Are you a fan of the we have a hub city that we're kind of watching grow and evolve as we do these different mini missions? Are you a fan of just hey, let's do this one weird, wacky little adventure, and then next week we're brand new people doing brand new things? Which of those do you think you have the most fun handling?
Gosh, that's still a tough question, because you kind of nailed it on the head. I currently run 3 different groups. I run a very Tolkien Lord of the Rings, which is the group that we play in, where you're on a magic quest to stop a crazy black dragon from destroying the universe.
Tolkien heard our adventures.
I think he did.
Quit and die. He would be like, "Oh my God, what? Ugh. This is gross. I hate it.
Probably. I mean, sorry, Tolkien, if you're up there listening to us.
I love you, buddy. You're the reason I'm here.
And then I have another group which is running their own Thieves Guild,
okay.
which I would love to switch the game. I would actually like to play it in and we'll probably talk about it a little later, Blades in the Dark.
Are you thinking of changing it to Blades in the Dark?
Yeah.
Oh boy, you should probably do that. That would be
yeah,
fun.
so they're running a kind of low level guild in a huge town, like gigantic town. And so every week is this almost flavor of the week. Maybe it's a bank heist that they pull off this week. Maybe they have to go stop another rival guild from smuggling in drugs, or whatever I can kind of think of off the top of my head. That's what we do, and I usually build interesting puzzles and combat and solutions to said problem. And then on the way, I've given them kind of monetary upgrades. I've looked up some different PDFs and things like that to kind of give them their own little personal home, and then that home can be upgraded with the money that they get. And so we'll probably play that for a while, see how that goes until either they get tired of it and want to do something else, or... And then my third group, we're doing kind of a monster mash, monster of the week, where they're in kind of a frontier town that's inflicted with some kind of necromancy, and they just are fighting ghouls and ghast and all sorts of creatures every time we play. But they're all fun in their own ways. So
sure. With
your guys' group, the campaign, if you will.
Yeah.
I kind of had to be part game master, part story writer.
Yeah.
In a way. And it's a weird story writing, because normally you'd have full control, and I don't. I don't have full control. As much as I like to think I do, I am writing around the actions that you guys make. So
yeah.
Our initial quest, you guys found this, you accidentally released this dragon, and that's kind of been the quest. You got to find this dragon and do all this stuff. And it's been kind of interesting building up, like, okay, so what do they do from here? Because when you guys got out, like, once you released him and you're like, oops, I didn't really give you much to go on to go find him. So I was kind of stalling by giving you guys, like, oh, just do some quests around town.
Weird side quests.
Yeah, little weird side things. And then I finally gave you that main quest, which was... he's leaving these giant scars in the earth, and I was finally able to, like, come up with something to move you guys into a grand story, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's been fun. It's been fun writing that, and it's been fun making the character, because I've made characters prior to, and I've taken some creative liberties of taking characters that I've seen in my favorite shows and things like that.
Yeah, I think we all do that to a certain extent. Yeah. Even unintentionally.
Right. And I'll put them into my games as, like, maybe they're side characters, maybe they're important, who knows. I know one of our ongoing jokes is one of the people you saved was actually Bill Murray.
It was just Bill Murray wearing, like, a wig.
Yeah, because it was a woman, and I think her name was close to Murray in some way, and then you guys were just like, it's Bill Murray, and so that was the joke.
That was one of those sessions I checked out at. So I guess the question is, for that one, it's like, do you like having sort of a very dynamic or a little bit more limited scope of how quickly and radically things can change?
I like both, to be honest, and that's why I run multiple sessions and in different ways. Like I would probably be really bored with the way I've been playing my games if they were all these kind of Tolkien adventures.
Sure.
I like the fact that two of them are kind of Monster Mash flavor of the week kind of games. So it gives me ways to be creative spontaneously, whereas your adventure lets me be creative as time goes on and you guys do stuff. So I that. I think that's one of the things is I like a little bit, variety is the spice of life.
Sure.
So I like to do a little bit of a mixture.
And then for those Monster Mashy ones, if you don't mind me asking, do you sort of do like every session is kind of like a self-contained episode, or do you do one of those things where it's like you throw a little nug of like a mystery at the end that like is suggesting that there might be a broader plot in the show?
So like Supernatural kind
of
Supernatural
situation. Lost did that a bunch.
Yeah.
It's like you could watch any episode and you could have a satisfying story, but at the end there's that like moment of like build up to a big secret reveal. So
yeah, and I think my answer to that is I'm actually doing both.
Okay.
My Thieves Guild, I just kind of let that go. They are so chaotic and crazy and silly that they're making their own plot just by being themselves. I don't have to do a dang thing. All I have to do is make an NPC that they don't like, and they spend an entire
murder boat him.
Yeah, and those like I made this guy who was a tailorer who made this like grand outfit, but they tricked him into not getting paid for it.
Oh, no.
And so he doesn't like them. And every time he sees them, he's like wants to try to get them arrested. And they've spent like probably a whole session thinking about how to either put him in jail or just ice him off completely. Yeah.
Wow.
Where
Nice.
my other group, the ones that are kind of doing the monster of the week,
Sure.
where they're in like this frontier town being attacked by like ghouls and ghosts, every session I've left off with this little bit of nugget that there's something bigger going on and that all these monsters are because of something greater, and maybe down the road they'll investigate that. Maybe it'll turn into an adventure, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
But the reason I keep it so open like that is sometimes it's really hard to get the same group of players to play week after week.
Yeah.
With, because we're all working and we all have crazy
and
schedules and,
Yeah.
And other
Sometimes
obligations.
people can afford to go on vacations. I don't know what that's like, but
Because of that, I like to keep it kind of loose and free for those
Sure.
groups, because I know some people are going to dip out one week and then some people are going to be subbed in, or maybe I only have 2 players. Sometimes it'll be a 2-3 player game. Sometimes it's 4, 5, 6 player game.
Sure.
So I like to keep it kind of loose and free so that people can just kind of hop in, and it's not this weird like, oh, I don't know how to integrate myself into this group. It's like, it's okay because everyone's new here.
Yeah.
Kind of a situation.
Oh, that sounds really nice, actually.
It is.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. Okay, so let's see. Do I have any other questions for you?
I don't know. Do you have any more questions for me? And this is just kind of
Who's your favorite NPC that you've ever made? And I think I know the answer, but I'm just curious what you're going to say. And for the people playing at home, I'm going to secretly write down what I think the answer is. After Cody says his answer, I will hold up, and if you get big bellows of laughter, you can assume that I got it right. So.
Okay, well, technically the character I want to say is not my own. I did not create the character that you wrote on the back of that note card, which I believe is Grigory.
Let the record show I wrote Grigory on this card.
No, Grigory is another.
Come from?
Grigory comes from another. I guess it would be like a D&D Let's Play.
Okay.
Of a group of people who did a West Marches style campaign. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of that.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's a very interesting way to play a role playing game. Okay. We'll just leave it at that.
We'll talk about it in the future, I'm sure.
And Grigory was one of the player characters who was made from one of the co-creators of Dungeon World.
Okay.
And Grigory was this kind of Russian, like, badass who was, like, jovial and happy, but he had this real dark side to him. That
he was
like,
a boisterous bruiser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think he was a necromancer cleric in the show that I was watching.
Okay.
And so I kind of kept, and he was only supposed to be, I was sitting there going, who do I want to throw at the characters? Because I didn't have a lot planned for that session. So I was like, I'll throw an interesting NPC. And I'm like, I love Grigory. Grigory's my favorite.
Yeah.
Because he's got the really shitty Russian accent, and he doesn't understand English very well.
Yeah. And he looks like a Santa Claus.
Yeah, he looks like, Eldritch Santa, as you guys have gotten used to calling him.
Well, I had another idea, but we can get into that later. But anyway, go on.
But to answer that question, gosh, I don't know. I think Ruby might be my favorite, and I don't think you ever met Ruby.
Okay.
Ruby is and this'll, for the people that were in this campaign who may or may not be listening, some spoilers. Oops.
There's not.
Thanks. Ruby was the daughter of a wizard, and I basically gave her the wild magic table.
Ooh.
And so I think it was, she was kind of, what I was trying to get was she was like a cross between Ariel and like some kind of like super powered magic user.
Like Ariel the Little Mermaid?
Yeah, Ariel and the Little Mermaid. So, like, she always had this kind of wanderlust to go outside, but the players never got to see that because they never talked to her before they broke her out.
Sure.
And so the wizard, for a while, was telling, like, because people were like, oh, there's this powerful Ruby that we want. And the twist was Ruby was actually his daughter.
Person?
Yeah, so that was like the big plot twist, and what I wanted to do with her, and she might come back later in another campaign, or maybe just in another episode. Like, she is and when I say wild magic, there's a class in 5th edition where you basically roll on this ridiculous table every time you cast a spell. And every time you do that, something weird happens. Like, maybe you turn into a potted plant.
Or you spit bubbles for a minute.
Yeah, you spit bubbles for a minute. Or you teleport to another dimension for a brief moment.
That's fun.
And so it was fun watching them deal with the fact that she kept... Like, as soon as they took her out of her room, which was basically suppressing her magic, they had to deal with...
Like the Magneto cube?
Yeah, basically. And it was just fun watching them deal with her, and I had so much more built up for her, but this group likes to play real fast and loose and kind of like shoot first, ask questions later.
Okay.
And at that point, it was too late for her to build her character, but like I had a lot planned for her, and she'll come up later.
Cool.
She can't be contained for too long.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
Some would say she can't be tamed.
Oh no. Oh no, Cody. Yeah. So anyway, so we're going to kind of transition into our last little segment that we're going to be talking about.
Oh, absolutely, and this is a fun one.
Yeah, this is a fun one, which is different styles of role-playing games out there, or different systems that at least we're aware of. There are lots of them out there, so we're not going to probably even be scratching the surface of what there is available out there, because they're ones that I have heard about in passing with having conversations with friends that they didn't tell me much more than outside of like tiny little nuggets of information.
Exactly.
This is ones that Cody and I have at least passing experience with, and if there's one that I know about and Cody doesn't know about, he can ask me questions, and vice versa. But we're going to talk about different systems that exist out there. So obviously the first one is Dungeons and Dragons. I think there's a couple of benefits of Dungeons and Dragons, which is it's established.
Yeah, it's established, and it's very specific in what it is. Yes. It is a fantasy hero role-playing game. If you're looking to play a hero in a Tolkien-style universe, boom, you've got the game. There are tons of resources for it. There are all in the game, at least in 5th edition, is pretty light on rules. There's not...
You don't have to have a master's degree in math to be a good D&D player in 5th edition.
Right, and that's the one we kind of dive in most, because who doesn't want to be a fantasy hero?
Exactly.
Who doesn't want to who doesn't want to be a part of that Lord of the Rings style or even the Hobbit style adventure?
And I feel like in a lot of ways that's the one that a lot of people can have easiest access to.
Yeah.
Like, you're almost always going to find those in your local Barnes & Noble or Books A Million stores. You can find all of that information right away. And then I think one of the things that I really enjoy about Dungeons & Dragons is the fact that it has a variety of dice, which I just think kind of adds to the fun and flavor of it.
You have a D20.
You have your D20. You have a D12, which, like, as far as I'm aware, only one class uses, but they have it, so they're going to work with it. There's a variety of dices, or die, if you will, and that just kind of adds to the fun. I think it showcases how different classes are good at different things, which is really beneficial. I guess on the disadvantage side of having a variety of dice is you have to get your hands on a variety of dice. There's not many board games out there that come equipped with a D10 or a percentile die, which is just technically 2d10 if you want to get specific. But.
Well, the thing about that is that used to be a big problem. I don't feel like if there's a game store in your neck of the woods, you know, whether I know for us it's Recess Games.
Sure.
I know for other people there's probably hundreds of different named places.
Yeah.
As long as there is one, they sell polyhedral dice. The polyhedral dice are the core of anything beyond your standard board game.
That's fair.
Well, and typically,
kind of,
you can go on Amazon and find polyhedral dice. I bought a whole bag, like with 100 of them.
A pound of dice?
Yeah, a big old pound of dice for, I believe it was on sale for $15.
There you go.
So I feel like, while yes, it's weird to have a bunch of, like, I have hundreds now of polyhedral dice that I use pretty regularly. But yeah, I think in terms of dice usage, D&D kind of takes the cake with using pretty much all the below 20 ones.
Sure. And then I think one of the nice things about D&D as well is I think it's a good balance of storytelling and mechanics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing too incredibly complicated one way or the other. So if you want to tell a really nice storytelling game, you can do that. If you want to do a game with a lot of mechanics, you can do that as well. It's versatile like that. Now moving over to the very, very storytelling side of the equation. Want to talk a little bit about Kingdoms?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's a game we actually played last weekend.
Yeah. So Kingdoms is basically completely a storytelling game with very little mechanics, at least in terms of percentages or dice rolls or spell cards or things like that. Kingdoms is, at its core, basically you build a kingdom, which can be anything from your traditional Lord of the Rings style epic castle to one of the things they talk about in the book is a kindergarten class and the dynamics between the students and the teachers of a little class. And so there are three main roles, so you need at the very least 3 people to play it. You need power, you need touchstone, and you need perspective.
Yep, those are the 3 different roles.
Those are the 3 ones. The character creation is simple, which is basically a series of questions. What does your character fear? What's your character's goals? How does your character connect to the character on the left? And basically, once you have developed your character, you come up with crossroads or situations, and you basically have little scenes to talk about the advantages or disadvantages of passing these touchstones, which are basically laws, to watch as your kingdom flourishes or falls apart at your feet.
Yeah.
So, would you like to get in a little bit more of the specific details?
Yeah, it's definitely. I know we say mechanically there's not a lot of dice, there's not a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of rules to remember.
Yeah,
it's not quite as light as some people would think because you're not rolling dice and your character sheet is probably 5 lines of text.
Yeah, we had it on note cards.
Yeah, I got a bunch of note cards and we just wrote all of our stuff on note cards. It's fun because no matter what, the defender in all cases has the kind of final say. So the game isn't about winning and losing.
Yeah,
it's about role-playing these characters that you've created. So I know in our first game, we picked a city that had a problem with zombies, and it's mildly related to the campaign we're running because we're nerds like that and we wanted to do that. So I decided to play a paladin who... Cleric, paladin. Sure. Practically the same thing. We can argue that later in another session. Anyways, I was a cleric who was kind of down on his luck.
Yeah.
I had to play this character who kind of gave up on the world a little bit, but at the same time he was doing everything he can to help the world. So it was an interesting dynamic, and one of the things that's nice is no matter what they threw at me, I kind of always had the final say in what my character was doing. And that's nice. So we played this interesting story. The 3 roles have their different perks. Like, for instance, mine was touchstone.
Yep.
So I kind of had this keen idea of what the people were thinking, and it can be as abstract or as literal as you want it, or want that to be. But basically I was able to, when we would tackle a problem, I would decide how the people would be affected by the choices that we made. Whereas your character, who was perspective,
yes,
you had the foresight and knowledge, and they could be as abstract or as literal as you want it.
I basically knew how things would actually go down, if I understood that correctly, right?
Yeah, you would know how things would pan out.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily like how the people would feel about it, but you definitely, like, in our case, ours was, do we basically start
a mandatory draft?
Yeah, mandatory draft. And so he knew that if we didn't do it, that the current zombie problem would overtake the city.
And we would be destroyed, because we only had like 30 guards left. Or
Sure.
30 fighting men left. So.
And And my character, on the other side of the spectrum, knew that if we had started this kind of mandatory law, that the people would be unhappy, because there were people who didn't want to be, they were just trying to survive. They didn't want to be a part of, this zombie apocalypse kind of situation.
Sure.
And we argued the strengths and stuff, and we eventually came to a compromise.
Yes.
And the great thing about this game is a lot of it is persuading the other side, or people who have obviously taken a side, to join your side. Yep. With kind of guarantees of how things are going to play out. And ultimately, power is the one who gets to decide how that crossroads goes. So your goal in the end, if you're trying to go a particular way, is to make sure that the person or the people, because people could have multiple roles, people with power, you wanted them on your side.
Yes.
And a lot of that was putting good things on the thing that you wanted selected, and then put bad things on the other thing.
Yep.
So that's kind of a loose interpretation. There's a lot of rules and kind of nuances to the game that would be its own podcast.
Episode, yeah. We'll probably go back to that. So the next one that I think we should maybe talk about, Gurps.
Yeah,
I think I know about more than you.
Yeah, I know I was actually thinking when I was trying to pick my first RPG, to just kind of be like, all right, I'm going to buy books. I'm going to go ham. Gurps was one of the options, but I ended up picking Dungeons and Dragons later for other reasons. But yeah, tell me about Gurps.
So
what makes Gurps so good?
Gurps stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System.
Cool.
Which was basically just a fancy way of saying that we are going to write lots of supplemental books that you can kind of throw in. So you had your core component book, and then there was like Gurps Pirates, Gurps Superheroes, Gurps Space Opera, Gurps Western, things like that. And so everything was always a little bit different, the way that the mechanics would work and things like that. One of the really nice things about Gurps is that everything is based around 6-sided dice.
Cool.
So if you have a bunch of board games in your house, chances are you're going to have a lot of 6-sided dice laying around. So as we talked about, it's not quite as hard to get polyhedral dice anymore, but if you don't necessarily want to
go to
that
a game
investment,
you
just need to get your hands on some 6-sided dice. And then one of the things that I really loved about Gurps was the character creation, it's been a really long time since I've built a character in Gurps.
Right. Well, don't get too hardcore about it, but just tell me about it.
One of my favorite things about it is that they would have these things called, I think of them as advantages and disadvantages. I think they were called attributes and something else. But basically, attributes were things that your character was good at, and there was a positive point value, and then there were things that were disadvantages that had a negative point value. And basically, as you were building this character, you wanted everything to kind of balance out to 0 at the end. And so if you took more disadvantages, that meant you had more points to play with at the end to make your character like stronger or more dexterous. But there were things that could potentially affect your character in gameplay situations. So the bad things would run the gambit from simple ones were like greedy. If you have the opportunity to steal something, you will take that opportunity. One of the things I talked about earlier was I had a compulsion to knock off enemies' hats.
That's still amazing.
One of my personal favorite ones that I don't think anyone ever actually played with, but it was very fun, was called Delusion, which was you think your character is really good at something, but they're not good at it at all. And so it's like, I think my character has a lot of street smarts, and so like you'd be walking down the street and you'd see like a local gang of thugs, and you'd be like, "It's cool, guys. I know how to relate to the kids." And you would walk up and you'd be like, "Oh, what's up, homies?" And then, like, they would just turn on you immediately because you sucked at talking to young people. Things like that. And it ranged, so like I said, there were some, like, simple ones. There were some hardcore ones. The most hardcore one was called Total Amnesia, which was basically you did not have access to your character sheet. The game master had access to your character sheet.
Ooh,
and
rough.
You would just roll things, and then they would tell you if it succeeded or if it failed. And so one of the weird things about Gurps is you were actually looking for the numbers to be lower than your skill.
Oh, okay.
So let's say like you had a 17 skill in something and you rolled like 5 6-sided dice and you rolled a 20, then you failed that thing.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So you want your skill to be higher so that when you roll it, you're more likely to go, okay, that's cool.
You're more likely to succeed the higher your thing is. Mm-hmm. the higher your skill is. And so that one was fun. I have 3 characters that I built in Gurps. There was Geek, who was my swashbuckling pirate man. There was Creature, who was part of our superhero campaign. Creature was basically like the Thing or Beast style monstrosity, where he was like a super genius who just had all kinds of crazy animal features.
Nice.
So he had wings and a tail and fangs and claws and chameleon skin and all these different things. And then the third one was we actually took our D&D characters and we kind of adapted them to Gurps. So Gurps was fun just because there's just so much supplemental material out there to play along with. So if you wanted to do something and you're not just finding a book anywhere with it, Gurps will help you out. They'll find a way to work with it. And then their main thing is a fun thing, a little thing called Banestorm, which is basically all these different kind of fantasy worlds pop up into our world. So one of the most fun things was you had like sort of our contemporary Middle East right next to 1001 Arabian Nights Middle East.
That's
They
cool.
were kind of bumping into each other.
That's awesome.
And so you get into the one, you had your onion domes and your djinn and things like that. And then you went to the other side and you had like, real conflicts and civil wars and things like that.
Crusades,
yeah, things like that. So that's sort of my quick overview of Gurps, just because it's been a while since I played it. I loved the character creation on it so much. I would sometimes sit down and just create characters for fun that I had no intention of ever playing, just because it was really fun to play around with the good stuff, bad stuff dynamic. That was actually the closest I ever got to being a dungeon master. I was planning on running a Gurps campaign for some friends my senior year of college, but because I went to the College of Worcester, my senior year was spent mainly writing a paper.
Oof.
So, yeah, that one wasn't quite as fun.
Rough.
Right. Is there another system you'd like to talk about?
It's not necessarily a particular system, but it's more of a series of systems that have molded into Powered by the Apocalypse.
Okay.
Which, if you've heard of Apocalypse World, Dungeon World,
Monster Heart.
Yeah, Monster Heart.
Monster of the Week.
Yep. There's a bunch of games that are powered by the apocalypse, and it's a very simple...
Which, for the record, that's a dope phrase right there. Powered by the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because and don't quote me, but I think it's because of the first game
was Apocalypse
World.
That's fine.
But
I'll buy it.
It's a great system. Basically, it requires 2d6s. That's all you need. And character creation is pretty simple from what I saw. And every system's a little different on that. But basically, you roll 2d6. And it's always, if you roll 6 or lower, you failed. Whatever it was you were doing, you failed. And then the dungeon master or the game master has total control of what happens next. Mm-hmm. The next one, if it was 7 to 9, it was you succeed, but the DM gets to throw something at you. Like, maybe you got the golden chalice of invincibility, but at the cost that you lost the arm that you used to grab it because it turned it to gold.
Rough.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's pretty intense.
It is. Or anything above 9 is super success. You got it. Like,
you
whatever.
did the thing.
You did the thing that you wanted to do. And that's such a cool concept. I know I ripped some concepts to do a little mini arc with your character that left the party in our adventure campaign.
Which we'll get to later, I'm sure.
Yeah. So. And I used the apocalypse, Powered by the Apocalypse, to basically make a nice little love letter for you and Finn, who was your party member that also stayed back with you.
Okay.
And that's where I got the 1 to 6 you failed. And,
sure.
And yeah, so it was a nice way of kind of rounding up that little side story that finished way quicker than where our campaign is currently.
Yep.
But I love the system. I think down the road I would like to pick up maybe Dungeon World or maybe just another one so that I have more stuff. I would also like to get into Gurps. I had my first, and this is kind of going back to kind of the GM side. When I was paying bills and stuff, I thought, I don't have money to buy the books.
Yeah.
So I made my own little system that was sort of loosely based off of Powered by the Apocalypse. And by total mistake, or just kind of happenstance, when I looked up the mechanics for, Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, it was very similar. Players got to roll 2d6, and I found the middle of that. And basically it ended up being very similar to that. Granted, I added some stuff, but the idea was it was secret societies like Illuminati. think Supernatural or Secret World. If you're a video game MMO fanatic, you've probably heard of Secret World, where there were secret organizations that were like trying to keep the world peaceful by eliminating like ghosts and demons and all sorts of things that go bump in the night. And so I kind of had this little, I had this whole background that I set up for it, and I had my fiance and a friend of mine be my first two kind of testing subjects for
guinea pigs.
But guinea pigs for it, and we had a lot of fun. They had to deal with a wizard, a witch, a necromancer, whatever you want to call it, someone who was using magic for evil, who was going to basically start the apocalypse.
Cool.
But yeah, I would love to go back, maybe through Gurps or through something else, and try to recreate that so that I can kind of take a dive back into that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that I loved the most about Gurps, just jumping back there just for just a brief second, was just the kind of robust characters you could create, where it's like you could create a wholly realized character versus like with D&D, like you can make that framework character and kind of fill the gaps. With Gurps, you kind of came out of there with like a fully realized creation, which was pretty cool. So my experience with Powered by the Apocalypse is I played a little bit of Monster Heart. It's a lot of fun. It's nice. Simple, shallow dive storytelling. And it's a really easy way to kind of get into the concept of rolling dice and doing all of those different things. So any other systems? I know. I played Blades in the Dark, but I don't know that much about it, so I can't really comment on it at the moment.
So I've been watching I think the creator, I don't want to say co-creator because I think it's just made by one guy.
Okay.
And he was actually basically demoing it on this show that I watch on YouTube and on Twitch called Roleplay. And I think it still might be ongoing. I'm not entirely sure. Or maybe it got canceled because people couldn't make it or whatever. But the idea behind Blades of the Dark is basically that fantasy rogue heist simulator.
It's a heist movie, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a heist movie, and it doesn't get super mechanical. Like, you have like a planning period where you go around and you investigate and you try to like get the scoop on what you're trying to do.
Sure.
And then there's this neat mechanic in it where you kind of get these points.
Okay.
That you'll use in the actual heist. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have to plan for every contingency, like, oh, what if there's more than 4 guards like we thought?
Yeah.
You just have to plan for, just enough. Like, you don't have to get super deep on the planning because you get points that you can use to kind of do like a retroactive flashback where, oh shit, there's guards coming, but good thing I left that ladder here because I snuck in as a guard and planted a ladder.
Cool.
And so you expend those points to create these almost MacGuffin-like situations.
Sure. Like when you're watching an Ocean's movie.
Right. Like,
oh, they failed, except no, they didn't fail because
somebody
planned for that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
And it's really neat. It's kind of, from what I saw, it can be kind of brutal.
Yeah.
The wound system is, I think you take like 3 light wounds before it gets bad, and it's very easy to acquire them depending on your game master.
Sure.
And once you get past those 3, you get like you have to roll like on a table, I think, and like you get like bruised ribs or broken arm, I think. Yeah, it's been a while since I've...
Then you have to do your vice to heal up. I know that about that.
Oh, yeah, your downtime. Like, everyone has their own vice. Like, the show that I was watching, somebody was a fine arts snob, kind of.
That's fun.
Which is funny because his character was like the big brute bruiser.
Broody guy.
But his vice was fine art. So whether it was like listening to classical music or going to art shows, like that was his thing, and it's such a cool concept.
Yeah.
And it would be a real, like, I want to pick up that game, and I would like to run my Thieves Guild through
it sounds like they're ready for it. It sounds like they are. Right. And then any other ones you can think of?
Well, I know you don't have experience in it, sure. But there's for those of you Star Wars nerds out there, there is a
I don't think those people are listening.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, damn it. Well,
sorry.
I guess I'm just talking to nobody then.
I know.
But
yeah.
They're
so angry that Colin Trevorrow left episode 9. Ha! No one's actually upset that Colin Trevorrow left episode 9.
Oof!
So, suck it, Colin Trevorrow.
So, there's a role-playing game set made by Fantasy Flight Games, which does a lot of board games, a lot of... They do a ton of Star Wars stuff, because I think they have the license to make Star Wars board games, basically.
Oh, that's cool.
So they go bananas with it. I know X-Wings miniatures is like a super huge thing, but...
Did they make like Imperial Assault?
Yeah, I think they made Imperial Assault. I think they also did a Game of Thrones thing, but not important. Getting off tangent. There's a Star Wars role-playing game, and I have the core rule books for that, and I have like the starter missions for those.
Yeah.
It is fun if you are a huge Star Wars nerd and you want to play in the Star Wars universe. I know you can kind of create anybody in that universe. Like you can play a diplomat from Alderaan who's trying to, get across the world while the Galactic Empire is chasing you down. You can play as a rebel. You can't play quite like a Jedi because...
That's probably good because those guys are a little broken.
Yeah, you can play what's called Force Sensitives because the Jedi Order's kind of been completely...
Executed Order 66?
Yeah. So there's not really anybody to train these people, but people are still Force sensitive. So instead of being like the Jedis from the first 3 movies where you can, super jump and force push and do all this stuff, you can either shallow dive into maybe a couple of those or be really good at force pushing and maybe get some interesting qualities with it. You can play a Jedi. I know there's a lightsaber item in the game. Granted, they tell you like, it's like the strongest weapon. You probably should hold off giving players that
until later.
They have a ton of different ships. There's ship combat, whether it's in space or whether it's like the land speeders in like the Battle of Endor. Land speeders?
That one, land speeders is Endor, yeah.
Yeah, which ones? What are the things called in Hoth? Wow, we're not good nerds.
There's the Imperial Walkers, and then are those just land speeder? No, it's not land speeders.
It's not a land speeder. Those are
land
the
speeders are actually
bikes.
Tatooine.
You're right. Wow, I'm the worst Star Wars nerd right now.
the land speeders are on Tatooine.
The bikes are on Endor. But I don't remember their exact name. Speeder bikes? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it. But whatever the vehicles that they used in the Battle of Hoth and Empire Strikes Back, like they have those. And you can play very different games. There are settings and campaign books.
They're the T-47 airspeeders.
Airspeeders.
That's why speed has to be somewhere in the name, or else it's not a Star Wars vehicle.
Probably.
That's the rules.
Accurate.
Them's the rules.
But yeah, there's 3 different campaign books. You can kind of go like a good side versus dark side, almost Jedi style campaign. You can go the Han Solo route and just be a smuggler on the backwater planets of the solar system. I know I was running a loose game where a group of unexpected people kind of got caught in a bad situation with a hut, and they were trying to basically escape this hut while becoming known smugglers.
That sounds like fun. Yeah, there's only one thing I know about it, and it's the thing that's the most intriguing for me about it, and it's why I really want to play, which is the idea of like partial successes versus complete successes versus failures, where which is such a Star Warsy thing to me, where it's like you escape the stormtroopers, but you landed in the garbage chute. Kind of deal.
Yeah, so the dice mechanics in that game, it's pretty cool. Instead of trying to roll a target number, which is typically how most dice rolling games work, you get a d6 and you got to roll a certain point. Like I got 2d6, I have to roll a 10. Or I got a d20, I need to roll a 15. In this game, you're given good dice and bad dice. And what happens is you roll all of them and you match them. And if you get more successes than failures, then you succeed at the thing you want to do. But the game master gets to decide how many bad dice are in your pile.
Sure.
So that's where the difficulty comes in. So and your stats are based on these dice. So if you've got a strength of 3 and you want to do something strength based, you get 3 green die.
Okay.
If you're proficient in said thing, you get a yellow die, and yellow dice are really good because they have the critical success. That's like rolling a 20 on a d20.
Okay.
In D&D standards, whereas On the other side of that spectrum, you can get a red die, which is like the exact opposite. It's like the super bad die. And yeah, you roll them together, and it creates a lot of interesting things because you can still fail, but get a critical success in somewhere else. So you can't complete the task that you were doing, but something else has opened up for you so that you can try something different. Or maybe you get a new item, or in your case, you succeed, but there was a great penalty, which is you fell into the garbage compactor on the detention level.
And that right there is like the most Star Warsy thing to me. Is like you can succeed, but you're not always succeeding in the way you thought you were succeeding.
Right.
Which is just an incredibly cool Star Warsy thing.
Yeah, and we'll definitely go through definitely the intro thing, and maybe down the road we'll pick up a Star Wars group to play.
Yeah, no, I'd love to try it.
Yeah, I think that's an episode.
That's an episode. All right, so we want to thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Fandom Roulette. Obviously, we're still kind of in the early stages, so we're figuring out what sticks, what doesn't stick, things like that. But a couple of shameless plugs right now. We wanted to sort of open up the conversation to you guys. Obviously, there's a lot of systems out there that we did not talk about, so if you guys want to throw in our way that we're not familiar with, or you think we'd like to learn a little bit more about, things like that, please feel free to tweet at us and follow us at fandomr_podcast on the Twitter, or send us an email at fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com. Personally, my personal Twitter handle is I am Big Tuna, if you want to see what I'm up to, which is sporadic weirdness. Do you have any personal things at the moment? No, not yet.
Personal? No.
That's fine.
I'm gonna get there.
That's
part of this, or what I would like to do down the road as we gain more followers, I want to make a personal Twitter account.
Yeah, for sure.
So that I can have the world throw in what kind of destruction and madness that our current campaign is, because we're going to be doing that campaign forever.
Sure.
Pretty much, or it feels like, at least with the way things, with the way our schedules are going.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be a little bit of time, but yeah. So feel free to send us information. As always, we'd love to hear from you guys, and we're building a community like this. So, thank you guys so much for listening. Signing off, I am Joe,
And I'm Cody.
and as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.